you all for being here today, friends, family, community members, former professors, and advisors. It's truly a pleasure to have you all here. So let's get started. The 21st century begins October 1st, 1982. This served as the tagline of Epcot Center, the second theme park to open in Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. So by show of hands, how many of you have actually been to Epcot?
I'm going to get asked that.
Okay. How many of you actually knew that Epcot was supposed to be a futuristic community of tomorrow? Okay, a handful of people, so that's either because you're Disney fans yourselves or you know me, but in any case, maybe, it depends. But in any case, thank you very much for being here. So over the next 20-25 minutes, we're going to explore the many facets that make up Epcot. So what does this presentation cover? Essentially, it encapsulates the research I've been conducting over this past year. So we are going to determine the various the various community components, quite a mouthful, that would have defined this Epcot Center, as well as translating the community to the Epcot theme park that all of us know today. Additionally, we are going to make connections between the Epcot community as well as the theme park, but most importantly, as you may have seen in the title, culture and technology have a huge influence in how Epcot operates. So we're going to look at their interconnections as well as their implications. So my main arguments are that the Epcot park assimilates many elements that the community would have been if it actually came to be, but it does so in a very accessible yet calculated manner that the Walt Disney theme parks are known for, but also being very successful as well. More specifically though, we're going to look at how the theme park models technological and cultural majesty, albeit there are conflicts that exist in an entertainment venue when you're trying to add these certain layers on top of it. So just so you know, as far as how I organized this project, I wanted to utilize a wide variety of sources to allow for a really comprehensive viewpoint. So more than half of my pieces actually came from journal articles, although I also used newspapers, magazines, books, and other formats, whether they were published decades ago or even more recently, again, to get that well-rounded perspective. Most of these sources are actually from independent individuals not affiliated with Disney, although there are a handful of sources that do utilize employees and writers on Disney to, once again, bring that well-rounded viewpoint to the subject matter. So you might have seen in the title, Disney's Ultimate World's Fair of Technological and Cultural Synergy. So what are World's Fairs? Well, essentially they have served as expositions, humongous places where millions of individuals visit to gain more of an awareness on both technological innovations as well as cultural productions. So many major World's Fairs were staged in the late 1800s and into the mid-20th century. Some exist today, albeit in kind of a smaller format. And these were really influential because we live in such an interconnected world today. Back then, not so much. You would have to go to a World's Fair to see the newest technological goods on display or to see other nations. So these were really impactful. And Walt Disney was very interested in these formats. So he actually participated in the New York World's Fair 1964-1965. This was a humongous event. And Disney actually staged 4 major attractions that would later be integrated into the Disney theme parks, one of which is the Carousel of Progress. Now basically, this is a theater that kind of revolves in a circle, and it's a show that depicts a middle-class white American family over the course of many decades in the 1900s. And it depicts how they respond to new technological goods in an ever-changing society that is America. Walt Disney was very interested in communities because he wanted to kind of return back to yesteryear. If you've ever visited Disneyland, you know how picturesque it is and how everything's quaint and wonderful. Well, that's what really Walt Disney wanted to see in real life. And in a sense, in the forms of these attractions, they very well carried on that message. But he wanted to do this at a much larger scale. And that influenced him to really study what made idealized communities, utopian settings, or satellite towns that would really have carried individuals into the future through living in a picturesque society. So some of these books I refer to in my sources to really gain some inspiration into how these influenced Walt Disney and how he would later develop plans for Epcot. So Epcot, an experimental prototype Community of Tomorrow. This acronym, so now you know what it stands for. It's not just a bunch of random letters, but in any case, Walt Disney imagined developing his own community or city setting where individuals would live, work, and play. So if you look at the top right-hand, the picture right there, that radial system layout, that is what the format of Epcot would have been like. So just imagine thousands of acres in Central Florida, which exists today as Walt Disney World, but much of it would have actually been a community with this format. So if you look at the center right there as kind of like the middle of a wheel, so in that center would have been an encapsulated 50-acre site roughly that would have been apparently enclosed, as I said. It would have included a cosmopolitan hotel, apartments, businesses, and a transportation hub underground that would have actually carried individuals into and out of the Epcot Center core. So you can kind of see some of the vehicles depicted here. So if you've been to Disneyland, you know monorails, or if you've been to Florida, you know the electric people mover systems. So these would have actually carried individuals into and out of the Epcot Center core and taken them to their residential areas or neighborhoods on the outlying areas, as well as industrial parks. Most of the adults living in Epcot would have actually been working at these places sponsored by major corporations. So they would have been producing goods to not only support the Epcot society, but also the broader society as a whole. Like I said, about 20,000 individuals would have lived in Epcot, and it would have been a really neat place, its own society, its own culture. But it would have carried elements of other cultures as well. So if you see this image of this international themed shopping plaza, if you've ever been to Disneyland and you've walked around New Orleans Square or Main Street, this is pretty much a pretty clear image of what Epcot would have included from a cultural standpoint in terms of restaurants and shops and entertainment venues. So it would have been really cool. This was a very secret project that Disney was working on. He purchased thousands of acres in Central Florida in the mid-1960s under a false so nobody would know that was him, very secretive, and he only enlisted a handful of trusted employees or Imagineers to work on this project. It was referred to as Project X. And so from around 1964 into 1966, Walt Disney and his Imagineers developed many plans for Epcot, what it would have encompassed. It would have been a perfect community, so to speak. And Walt Disney knew to make this a reality, he would need to gain support from Florida legislature to make this its own municipality, or essentially its own self-functioning government with utilities, fire, police, etc. And in fact, in May 1967, Governor Kirk approved the legislation. Unfortunately, that did follow Walt Disney's death in December 1966. So it was an amazing idea, but the leader was gone. And the people at the head of the Walt Disney Company at the time didn't necessarily know how to translate this idea, this community, this majestic vision into something that people could actually inhabit. It was not seen as technologically, socially, or even financially realistic. This was imagined to be a multi-billion-dollar project, even though it could have produced billions of dollars over the course of a few decades, and even brought in tens of thousands of jobs. It was a monumental effort, and think about this. This is 50 years ago. We're very idealistic today, and obviously Walt Disney was quite the visionary back then, but this is almost thinking way ahead in the future. So Disney didn't know what to do, but they knew how to make theme parks, and quite well at that. So they actually decided into the mid-1970s, we can't make Epcot the community, but we can make this into a theme park, or basically a World's Fair on steroids. And I'm glad you appreciate that. So Epcot Center opened on October 1st, 1982. Most of us today, though, just know it as Epcot, as the name has since been abridged. So one of the sources that I refer to tonight refers to Epcot as a spirited, if sanitized, nod to the Great World's Expositions, or as Disney publicity describes it, the World's Fair of tomorrow you can see today. This was a magnificent place for individuals stepping into its gates 32 years ago. It still is today. So what are we going to really look at today? Well, and I saw that many of you have been to Epcot, or at least are familiar with the park. So you might know Future World, which is the technological area of the park. as well as World Showcase, which focuses on 11 different representations of nations from around the world. So my project specifically is looking at the connections between technology and culture. So in what ways does the Epcot theme park resemble Walt Disney's community vision? It's both a technological showcase and a cultural exposition. So let's look at Future World first. Its pavilions, as they exist today, encompass many themes, including imagination, nature, human communication, transportation, etc. And they're all very effective in entertaining individuals, providing some education, but most of all inspiring us. However, there are some different challenges that exist in depicting technology in a theme park setting, such as Epcot. So we're going to look at these and determine maybe potential solutions in rectifying these issues. So one is corporate sponsorships. In order to subsidize the cost of developing these pavilions, Disney knew it needed corporate sponsorships. So ExxonMobil, General Electric, and others came in to help offset the cost. But we must wonder, does financial influence sway messaging? And if so, in what ways? Well, absolutely, in several cases, but not all, the corporation did play a role in some of the content delivery. So the universe of energy attraction, which focuses on both renewable and non-renewable forms of energy, was for many years sponsored by ExxonMobil. However, the really interesting attraction does not necessarily address oil spills, that many of them having been caused by the sponsor. So that was kind of unfortunate. And also in the Land Pavilion, which is focused on agricultural innovations, doesn't necessarily pay attention to crop decay, because again, that would serve as a negative. And we visit these theme parks because we want to be entertained, and obviously negative things do happen in real life, but presenting these in a theme park setting, which is meant to really entertain us, this would almost undermine its mission. So that was kind of a problem. Perhaps if Disney attractions address these very minimally or subtly, then they could achieve their cause of addressing these issues, but you must also take into consideration the balancing act that exists. Technology will solve all problems. This is a very explicit message that is found in many of the pavilions, but we must understand that it's not just technology that allows us to accomplish our goals, but also human ingenuity and the social sciences. It's not just the hard sciences that allow us to realize the possibilities of the future. And incorporating more of that would also help Epcot's mission. Making history entertaining is something that is found in many Disney attractions, and many of them utilize this extremely effectively. Epcot does in many ways too, but it's sometimes hard to present subject matter that is typically more dry, such as the history of human communication, with the narrative, and that's, again, a struggle that Epcot faces. So these are audio animatronics, or robots, of some scholars in the Spaceship Earth attraction. So basically the big golf ball, that's the icon of the park, that's where these guys can be found. Contrasting themes between the different pavilions is also a struggle that exists. And that's because you have pavilions that have alternative goals, so to speak, but they're seen as individual entities. So if you think about the universe of energy, which kind of focuses on, in some ways, exploiting the planet, whereas the land is more on supporting the planet through using new agricultural technologies, you have those dual purposes. And Future World almost sees these as individual elements, but they're very interconnected. And again, Epcot, through addressing these issues, can alleviate the problem, but when you have things with totally opposite ends of the spectrum, it's hard to do that. We'll see some connections that we just discussed in the World Showcase area, which has 11 different countries, and all of them are notated there by their flags. But they also focus on some challenges that we must look at. So first is United States ethnocentrism. So what this essentially means is looking at your country that you inhabit, so in our case, the United States, as the best, and looking at it only from that lens, even though many other cultures influence us as well. So in the World Showcase environment, the American Adventure Pavilion is actually located in the center of World Showcase, which almost reinforces that centralist perspective, or the US being at the center of the world. Whether or not that was the true reason, we can interpret the true cause, but in any case, the American Adventure does kind of encompass that ethnocentrism, and you find that in some of the other pavilions. Even if you visit the France pavilion or Japan, you're not going to find American flags because that wouldn't look right. But you have that American influence because Disney is an American company that was responsible for developing these pavilions, albeit with influence from other cultures and countries coming in as representatives to make sure things are as authentic and accurate as possible, but it is from the United States lens. Stereotype reinforcement. Now, stereotypes are not always bad, but they do kind of play to our preconceived notions. So this is an example of Sergio, one of the entertainers in the Italy pavilion. So you can see he's wearing a quote-unquote traditional outfit. He's miming, juggling, entertaining kids, and I mean, he is very entertaining, no doubt, but is this necessarily what all Italian entertainers are like? Perhaps this is just a snippet of what all Italian entertainers are like. So perhaps if Epcot encompassed more representation in terms of its entertainment, it could be more effective in demonstrating representativeness. The dismissal of international relations and events is the main other factor we're going to look at with World Showcase. As I said with Future World, these pavilions are seen as unique entities, but everything that exists is interconnected, and the same goes for all the different countries around the world, or at least around World Showcase. So the American Adventure, as I said, it's located in the center of World Showcase. Its neighbors in Epcot are Japan and Italy, which were actually opponents during World War II. So it's kind of a weird relationship in play that isn't necessarily addressed because, once again, talking about the negative conflicts that exist in real life in an entertainment venue would be negative. But there are certain elements that are very effective in showcasing relationships. Some of the Epcot pavilions have different exhibits that talk to the specific culture's history. It could be even more effective through talking about the interconnectedness. So I said Epcot is its culture, but it's also influenced by pop culture and technology. And we see this very evidently in the Living Seas Pavilion, which is now called the Seas with Nemo and Friends. So our fine fish friends from Finding Nemo, which really took the world by storm a decade ago, came into the Living Seas as a result of just demand to see Marlin and Dory in a fish-themed environment, the marine life. But also, we see implementation of technology. So these characters are actually digitally projected into the aquarium with the real-life fish on a little ride that you take. So you see a duality between reality and fiction. So you have to kind of wonder, okay, which one's real? Well, it should be pretty evident, but it's quite entertaining to see that balance. Speaking of Dory, or at least her voice artist, Ellen DeGeneres, she exists at Epcot too. They really like Ellen. Ellen has her own ride called Elms Energy Adventure, and this opened in 1996 in a renovated version of the Universe of Energy attraction. So I mentioned Universe of Energy, renewable, non-renewable sources, kind of a dry subject, and that's how a lot of people saw the attraction when it opened. So they needed to respond and make it more entertaining. So bringing Ellen and Bill Nye the Science Guy into the picture helped in making helping make the technology much more accessible, especially to younger audiences. Epcot's bottom line, though, like any other business, is to make money, and it finds very resourceful ways of accomplishing just this. So the annual Flower and Garden Festival, which is hosted really all over Epcot, you'll see a bit more in World Showcase, but you'll see the demonstration of culture and technology. From a technological standpoint, if you know Disney horticulturalists, so the guys coming up with, and gals coming up with really all the cool gardening techniques, they're responsible for crafting Mr. Captain Hook here, all made out of flowers. I mean, that's pretty incredible, and you find tons of characters and creative designs. So through having those technological innovators in the picture, you see reflection of that, but also from a culture standpoint. HGTV, it's one of the biggest cable channels. The personalities from the network actually present lectures at Epcot during Flower and Garden. So we see, again, technology and culture playing into how Epcot changes. And from an educational standpoint, Epcot really does provide a lot of opportunities to learn something new. And there are specific programs and tours catered to school groups as well as researchers to enhance their understanding of certain subjects that they're learning about in the classroom or laboratory settings. But even as a casual guest, you might walk away from Epcot thinking, wow, I never knew this, or maybe I didn't learn a ton about the marine life in the living seas or the seas pavilion, but I want to learn more about clownfish or sharks. And this provides us with the impetus to return home and feel inspired, wanting to learn more. And that's where Epcot is very effective, and that's what really inspired me to develop this project. So a little collage of some memories, but I first visited Epcot at age 7. It was a really exciting time because not only was I getting older and being exposed to more subjects, but Epcot was also right around the turn of the millennium at that point, and there were lots of opportunities to see other cultures demonstrated, as well as the really wonderful attractions. And so I walked away, like maybe some of you who have gone to Epcot, feeling more inspired and wanting to learn more about technology or transportation, anything along those lines. And little would I realize 15 years later that would really set up what I would cater a year toward for my thesis research project. So that's where Epcot really blends both technology and culture most successfully, inspiration. And in conclusion, if any of you have gone on the Carousel of Progress ride at Walt Disney World, or maybe you just know the lyrics, they go by, "There's a great big beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away." That was Walt Disney in a nutshell. He was a visionary, a man who saw the possibilities of the future, and he wanted to play a role in shaping it, playing to both his interest in technology, but also developing his own culture and taking elements of other cultures to form unique environments. And while Epcot, the community, may have not realized in the way that he imagined it, it's in essence a theme park, I'm sure Walt Disney would be most proud and most happy to see that millions of individuals each year walk away inspired and being exposed to new elements of technology and culture. And so on that note, I'm going to take any questions from my committee or any of you, and thank you very much.